Welcome back to the channel, everybody. So today, I'm going to try and teach you as quickly and competently as I can how to build your first successful planted dirted tank, or just even your first successful beginner aquarium. This setup for me has always been bulletproof. That's not to say that you can't run into problems, but this has been a very successful setup to me. And this is why I got back into the hobby after years of fussing around with chemicals and filters and complex equations to figure out how to get life to thrive in my aquariums. I've come back to it in a very natural way, a very easy way, and I've had success with this. And I want to teach this to you. So, there's a couple of things I'm going to assume throughout the course of this video, and you need to know them at the start. First thing is first. One of the most important things I can tell you before you do anything, before you buy your tank, before you buy your plants, your light, your filter, your heater, before you buy any of that, go to the fish store. Look at the fish that you want to get involved in. Ask them if they're difficult fish to keep, if they're cold water or hot water, if they're. We don't want to get too technical. Stick to something simple, stick to something that you like, obviously. I strongly recommend, as a novice, you stay away from, and they're going to call these beginner fish, stay away from live bears of all kinds. Guppies, platies, mollies, swords. My reason for this is very simple. Yes, they're easy fish to take care of and keep, but if you buy yourself a simple setup and you put males and females in that tank, they're going to breed. And when they start to breed, you're going to start to encounter problems down the road because all these extra mouths eating food are all extra fish making waste when they're done. And that waste is going to build up in your aquarium and start to cause you problems. And it's going to start to do things to your water chemistry that you probably don't understand yet and weren't prepared for. So, to avoid all of that hassle, to avoid the trouble, I strongly recommend you do not get involved in live bearing fish unless you are buying all of one sex, in which case I strongly suggest you stick to the males because any females you buy at the store are very probably, if they've been kept in a tank with the other males and everything else, and even if they haven't, they're probably pregnant already. So, having said that, research your fish so you know what they like, what you might need. If you're buying a cichlid or any other kind of fish that is going to dig, this method may not be the best method for you. There are other ways to do this. I'll get into that maybe in another video, but stay away from your cichlids and your digging fish. That's not a lot of them. Stick to your gouramis. Stick to I don't know, white cloud minnows, neon tetras, barbs, any of your common fish, your common community fish will be fine. This is where you learn. This is what you cut your teeth on until you feel familiar with what you're doing. The other thing I've assumed throughout this video, we're not buying a filter. I'm trying to keep this cheap. This doesn't need to be an expensive hobby. I'm going to show you that through this setup. You don't need to spend a ton of money on things. You don't need to spend a ton of money on equipment. You don't need to buy a canister filter for a 10-gallon tank. All you need is a sponge filter. It will do a better job of it for you. You don't need a heater in most cases. I live in Canada. My tanks are in the basement. I have tropical fish. I have shrimp. I've had gouramis. I've had all of it. My tanks drop down to 65 approximately in the wintertime here in the basement because I don't spend a lot of money heating the basement. I'm not down here a lot. And they roll up to about 74, 75 degrees in the summertime because I have air conditioning and my basement usually stays pretty cool even during the hot summer months. So I suggest you very strongly, number one, stay away from live bears. Find yourself an entry level easy fish. Ditch the heater. You probably don't need it where you are. You can probably do without. And the last thing is the light. You're going to need a light. I don't talk about it a lot in this video because that gets into a whole other arrangement about algae and nutrition. And look, buy yourself a light. Doesn't matter what light. You go to a hardware store and buy yourself a floodlight if that's what you really want. Tune into MD Fish and his early videos and you'll see that's what he had over his tanks. If you're going to buy yourself a light and you're going to buy yourself an aquarium light, don't get mesmerized by the razzle dazzle, by the simulated sunrise and sunset. And look, you need a simple light. You probably want a dimmer switch on that light. And if you can afford it, you can get one that has a timer, all the better. You set it, you forget it, and off you go. If you buy a light that has a dimmable function, I strongly suggest when you start your tank, start your light at about 50% brightness, especially if you're going with the tank I recommend for most beginners, which is your 20-gallon long. They're a shallower tank. They don't need the crazy bright light. And most aquarium lights are intended to illuminate up to a much deeper tank. Turn your light down so you don't end up with a whole lot of algae. If you get the little brown spotted stuff all over the bottom of your tank after you set it up, that's okay. That's normal. We expect that. It's the green, hard spot algae that we're trying to avoid in the very beginning. I hope I teach you something through this video. I did try to keep it short, believe it or not. I guess I'm just not good at short videos. I hope you enjoy it. I decided to release this video after seeing how my other video took off and realizing, well, took off to me is like, 600 views, which was great. But I realized that I think what most people were tuning in for there is the process of building the tank. So here I try to lay it out a little more organized, maybe a little bit more in depth. Hopefully I teach you how to start your very first tank successfully without all the problems, uh, without all the issues that most people end up having on their very first tank and fish getting sick and dying. Let's avoid that and enjoy the hobby. So here we go, guys. Off to the video. Okay, so now that we got all that out of the way, here's what we're going to do. You're going to go find yourself a tank. Maybe even you can go find yourself a used tank for a good price somewhere. Stay away from the beginner tanks, in air quotes, your small 3-gallon, 5-gallon tanks. Bigger is better and easier in this hobby, more or less. The smaller the water volume, the harder it is to maintain stability. And without getting into water parameters and KH and GH and pH and all these things, let's stick to the basics. The larger the volume of water, the easier it is to maintain stability and the easier it is to keep all of those variables under control. I would suggest you don't start with anything smaller than a 10. I think your best bet is probably to go into a 20-gallon long tank. Lots of room for plants and fish and shoaling and schooling behavior. It'll be a great little tank for you to learn on. Stay away from beginner tanks. They are designed to keep you going back to the stores and buying filters, buying supplies, buying what have you. Stick to your 20-gallon, 30-gallon, 55-gallon. They're all pretty good tanks. I wouldn't get any larger than that. The larger the tank, the more money you're going to spend on plants. So 20-gallon tank is a good place to start. Okay, guys. So here comes the next bit. You're going to put dirt in your tank. Yes, I said you're going to put dirt in your tank. This is okay. It's going to work. Trust me. This is part of what makes this tank so simple to take care of. So go to the store, grab yourself some organic potting mix. I like Miracle Grow just because I know it's safe. Whatever one you decide to use, I would suggest you make sure that there are no chemicals, no fertilizers added to it. Just make sure it's just dirt. Don't add anything to it. We don't need it. What I would also suggest you do is when you put it in your tank, you put it in these little mesh bags that you see on your screen. You can get these at Amazon. They're pretty cheap. It just makes tank maintenance later simple. If at some point in the future you decide that you want to pull some plants out and they're heavily rooted plants, this will make pulling those plants out simpler because when you pull the plants out, instead of pulling out a big clump of dirt with it and polluting your tank, you'll just pull out the roots and the rest of it will stay in the bags. They won't come through the next layer that we put on top of this. So go get yourself some dirt. You need about an inch. Just put your knuckle in the bottom of the aquarium, it doesn't matter what one, and fill it up to about that level. If you're not putting it in mush bags, that's okay. You can do that. Just remember, when you pull heavily rooted plants out of that aquarium, you're probably going to pull some dirt with it. So if you can, get some mesh bags. Put your dirt in it, about an inch, 2 inches. There's probably about 2 inches here. And we'll get ready for the next step. Okay, so this isn't necessary, but I highly recommend it. If you have an opportunity to grab yourself some lava rock, some crushed lava rock, sometimes they refer to it as fire pit stone for your patio, anything small, crushed up lava rock. I would suggest you put a layer of this down on top of the dirt. Doesn't have to be thick, just enough to cover the mesh bags like you can see in the screen here. This will help colonize or give your bacterial colony a place to be. Yes, that's right. There's a bacteria colony growing in your aquarium. This is what keeps it clean and necessary and deals with the waste product of your fish. And this will give them a good place to develop. It's not necessary, but if you have the resources to do it, I highly recommend you put this in. All right, we're on to the next step. Okay, guys, so go get yourself some sand. I strongly suggest you go to your hardware store. Around here, we have a PV Mart, TSC, Home Hardware, Canadian Tire, Home Depot, Lowe's. Pick one, any of them. Aquarium stores will charge you a fortune for sand. You can go to any hardware store and pick up blasting sand, play sand. You're not going to get clean white sand, but trust me, once you get into this hobby, you won't want white sand anyways. It shows every flaw in your scape. I suggest using black sand, black blasting sand. You get it about 20 bucks Canadian for a 50-pound bag. That's more than enough to do two 20-gallon aquariums, or pretty dang near. Fish stores are going to charge you a fortune for sand. Now, granted, some of this stuff is dusty. You can clearly see as I'm putting it in here, dust is raising up. You're welcome to take it and rinse it. I just find it harder to deal with later. Dealing with wet sand to cover the bottom of aquarium is a bit of a trick. I like to put it in dry, and I just deal with the fact that my aquarium is going to be a little messy, a little bit of particulate matter in it for a few days until the filter catches up with it. You do what works for you. When you put the sand down, double the amount of sand that you have dirt. So if you put an inch of dirt in the bottom, put 2 inches of sand on top of it. If you put 2 inches of dirt on the bottom, put 4 inches of sand on top of it. I'd recommend 1 to 3 in that neighborhood. I don't like, you're going to take up a lot of the bottom of your aquarium. That's okay. That's okay. This is what making a simple beginner aquarium is all about. This aquarium is going to make this hobby so much easier for you to fall in love with. I'm not saying you're never going to have problems, but I'm saying you'll get an appreciation and an enjoyment of the hobby and fall in love with it before you have problems this way. So find yourself some sand. Find yourself some cheap sand. Go to your hardware store, buy a big bag of it, and put it all over top of this dirt. Okay? On to the next step. All right, guys. So the substrate's done. That's the most important part. You've already built yourself a much more successful tank than you've probably ever had. So here comes the decorating part. So the only thing I'm really going to suggest to you on this, couple small things. I mean, how you decorate your tank is entirely up to you. It's entirely personal preference. This is going to be in your house. Make it look the way you want it to. Couple of small things I'll point out. I would suggest you keep your decorations away from the glass. Only because a time eventually will come when you want to clean the glass of your aquarium, at least the front of it. And you're going to find that if you've built your aquarium landscape right up to the glass, a lot of the instruments that you use to clean the glass are not going to fit there. And some of the fish probably won't fit in that space. So when you're designing your hardscape, keep that in mind that you might want to leave at least an inch around the very edges of your glass so you can get some kind of a cleaning instrument or a fish back there to clean up the algae and the mullum and the detritus that's just naturally going to build up in that aquarium. The other thing I suggest, before you go to your fish store to buy that Sirius stone or the elder stone or the dragon stone, or you go to Amazon, go to your local hardware store. Go to your local landscape area facility. They will have rocks in bulk, much cheaper than you're going to get them at your aquarium store. Now, they may not have all the same ones that the aquarium store has, but I'll bet you find something there for less than half the price at an aquarium store that you'll like almost as much. It's a good way to save yourself a few bucks. I keep saying this is not an expensive hobby, and it doesn't need to be. You just need to know where to go to save yourself a dollar or two. And I highly recommend that's where you head first. The only other thing I'll caution you about here is using stones that are going to affect your water. Stones like limestone. You can find out, usually your landscape store will be able to tell you, or you can just ask them what kind of stone you're buying and Google it and ask if it raises or lowers your pH or if it's neutral. Just something simple to keep in mind. Don't get too technical. Don't get hung up on those details. Find yourself some cheap stone, throw in a little piece of wood, and decorate it as you choose. However, whatever looks good to you. On to the next step. Okay, guys. So, your next step is planting. This is very important. Okay, you've got your substrate in. That's half the battle. Here's the other half, your plants. You need live plants. Do not buy fake plastic plants. They're just going to create you a real life mess. Buy some plants. Go to your fish store, go to your local guy who has fish, and ask him for some cuttings wherever you can get them. But something I want you to keep in mind, and you can see I'm doing it on the screen here. When you buy plants from a store, they're going to sell them to you, and they're probably going to be 6 to 8 inches long. You can take that stack and cut them down at each leaf node, like you see me doing here, or just make your life simple. Cut it in half. Now you have twice as many plants. Get yourself some stem plants. Get yourself a couple of big bunches of stem plants. Depends on how much or how big an aquarium you have. But if you have a 20-gallon aquarium, you want it very heavily planted, 50, 60% or more. You don't need to spend a fortune. Buy your stem plants, cut them in half, put both ends in the ground, and let them start growing. Fill that tank up with plants. Whatever crazy money you thought you were going to have to spend on filters and heaters and whatnot, buy yourself some plants. These are your filter. These are what is going to save you from having so many problems down the road. I can't stress this enough. Plants, plants, plants. Lots and lots of plants. Buy easy plants. Buy water wisteria, buy water sprite, Limnophilia sessiflora, Ludwigia. Simple, easy to grow beginner plants. Don't go out buying the red lilies. Even sometimes red plants in general are harder to grow because they require harsher light. Stick to the simple basics. This is our first aquarium. You're not going to go buy a Ferrari for your first car and take it off down a racetrack. We're not going to do the same thing here. Stick to the basics. Buy yourself a bunch of plants, cut them up, stick them in the ground. You're going to save yourself a bunch of money and a bunch of headache down the road. Doesn't matter what plants, as long as you got a bunch of stem plants. The reason is these are going to absorb all of the toxins, all of the poisons, all of the waste product from your water column that would otherwise impact your fish and make them sick and unhealthy. Okay, so real simple. Plant them, obviously. You don't need tweezers. It's nice to have, especially with this setup, because you're going to have a hard time getting through the lava rock. So planting tweezers are a handy thing to have. I would recommend getting them. Put your plants in. Don't need to bury them. Don't need to be crazy about it. Figure out roughly what you think you want it to look like and start sticking them in the ground. You can always move them around later, guys. If you get into this thing in a couple of weeks, you look at your tank and go, I don't like this. It didn't work out. It's not how I thought it was going to look. Move them around. Doesn't matter. Get them in the water. Get them filtering your water. Stick as many plants in as you can, all over the place. Provide lots of hiding places for your fish. If you bought epiphytes, you can just glue them to a rock. You can just tuck them in crevices. They'll be fine. I like to tuck epiphytes underneath of a rock just to make sure that you leave the rhizome, that thick stem part that all the leaves are growing out of, leave that above the dirt. By tucking it under a rock beside the sand or wherever it is you have for substrate, it'll allow those roots to get into the soil and the plant will grow much faster than if it was just tucked in between two rocks in the open water. They'll grow, they'll survive, but they'll do much better if their actually roots have a chance to get into the substrate. So plant up your tank, guys. Plant it up. Put all your plants in here. Get them arranged however you like it, and we'll get ready for the next step. This is getting really simple, guys. We're almost there. You're almost on your way to the most successful aquarium you've probably ever had. Okay, guys. So this is it. We're going to fill the tank up. Get your hose and a bucket or a plate or a pitcher or direct your hose to one of those big rocks. Don't just stick it in the tank and kick up all that sand away from the dirt. You don't want the sand coming off of that dirt all the way down. You're going to direct your hose on top of a rock so that when the water comes out, we're not flushing the sand out and getting down to the dirt. So a little bowl, direct it towards a rock, something to that effect so we're not kicking up a mess. We're going to fill the tank up. If you have some fertilizer, add some fertilizer. Just this week, just this 1 week, there's lots of nutrients in this tank. We don't need to add fertilizers all the time. You're just going to create algae. Just this week, if you have it. If you don't buy it. If you have it, put it in. The other thing you can add in right now is any of your startup. Now, I don't believe you need this, but you can add it if you have a tank startup, the live bacteria, the chlorine detoxifier, any of that stuff. You can put it in now if you want. I don't suggest adding it after this at any point. You shouldn't need it. Just let your water stand for 24 to 48 hours before you add it in if you need to top up your tank. Or you could just wait 48 hours from here before you add in your first fish. Try to limit how many chemicals you're putting in your tank. Chemicals lead to more chemicals, which lead to more chemicals, and that always leads to problems. The less chemical we put in our tanks, the better off we're going to be. Okay? Add in your filter. If you're running a sponge filter, hook up your air lines and get it going. Make sure you squeeze your sponges once you get them underwater so that that starts pulling water through right away. Um, Add in any other decorations or anything else we're ready for here. And now we're going to start to think about our fish. Now we're not going to put them all in here at once. We're not ready for that. We're just getting started. And you're not going to put in your cleanup crew first. That means your cories, your autosynclus. Please don't buy a pleco. Please don't buy a pleco. It's just going to pollute your tank, and they get too doggone big, especially in a 20-gallon long. Save the plecos for the bigger tanks and when you're a little bit more experienced. Stay away from them right now. Autosynclus are a great substitute. But you don't need your cleanup crew in there right now. The tank is clean. There's nothing for them to do. So pick your fish, add in a few. If you were going to get a couple of gouramis and some neon tetras and a cleanup crew, maybe add in your neon tetras first, or just add in your gouramis. But don't dump them all in all at once. Put a couple in this week and let the tank run for a week or so. And if things are still going well, put in the next couple of fish, and so on until you have your tank filled up with your fish, your plants, and your hardscape. Everything is ticking along just fine. Now, when it comes to water testing, I hesitate to tell any of you to do this. Water testing is usually what leads people down the road of chasing variables and markers on water chemistry that just aren't important in the beginning, and it usually leads most people to quit. The only thing you really need to be concerned about right now is ammonia. That is the problem in most new tank setups. Now, if you have enough plants in here, you shouldn't have that problem. If you really want to make sure you're not going to have that problem, buy a couple of floating plants. Water lettuce is great. Just keep it away from the air bubbles on an air sponge because they don't like to get wet. Now, you're going to have to watch their population because they're going to multiply like crazy and start cutting out your light. So, as they multiply, pull a few of them out every now and then so the light is still getting in your tank. Don't let them take over your tank. But they're great little filters. They're nature's little filters, and they're perfect for new tank setups. You drop them in there, and as they multiply, you pull a few out every week or every few days, and they keep your water clean. You don't have to worry about water chemistry. It's that simple, guys. This tank is pretty bulletproof. I really haven't ever had an issue setting these tanks up. I haven't had ammonia spikes or nitrate spikes or nitrate spikes. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible. It's always possible. You can always run into a problem that you don't foresee. But this tank should give you one of the more solid foundations you've had to start up with. Put your light on. Put it down to about 50%. If you've got an aquarium light and it has a dimmer on it, I hope you bought one with a dimmer. If it has a dimmer on it, reduce the light. Start off at about 50% and see how things go. If you start getting a lot of algae, drop the light down a little bit. That brown diatom algae, that brown spot algae that you're going to see in your tank in the beginning, that's okay. That'll go away. What we're talking about is the green algae. Okay, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope I've taught you something useful, and I really hope this leads to your first successful aquarium in this hobby. Guys, this has been a blast. I've really enjoyed this. Take care. Until the next time.